Nishant Shandilya is the Regional Coordinator of Australia and New Zealand for EUREXUS Worldwide. I met with him in Sydney for this interview. Nishant Shandilya, thanks for joining us on Monnet Conversations.
Thank you very much for inviting. It's a pleasure.
What exactly is EUREXUS?
First of all, what we need to understand is EUREXUS is an initiative of the European Commission that addresses barriers to the mobility of researchers and seeks to enhance scientific collaboration between Europe and rest of the world. So when EUREXUS started, it was in 2006 that it came into being as an international arm, EUREXUS Worldwide, right? So it started with USA, then it moved to Japan, China, but we started EUREXUS Australia and New Zealand in 2020, of January 2020. The idea was, of course, four-pronged. The first thing was jobs and funding, is to help how researchers can avail jobs and funding opportunities. So if you look at our website right now, there are approximately 15,000 jobs that are available for researchers, and there are around 150 funding opportunities. So that is one part of what EUREXUS is. The second part is information and assistance. What does that mean? So information and assistance is predominantly if a researcher wants to go to Europe and do some research, we are there to help them in terms of country-specific or member state-specific information. So, for example, a researcher wants to go to Germany. How do they know what sort of opportunities are there in Germany, right? That is one component of information and assistance. The other component is there are more than 600 EUREXUS service centers. What do these do? They provide free of charge support, for example, for accommodation, visa processing, and everything. So that is information and assistance. The third part is partnering. So what is partnering? So if as an institution or as a university, you want to have talented researchers, right? That is where you can tap the resources. There are almost 140,000 members who are registered with their CVs on the platform. And as a researcher, if they are trying to find a partner university or institute they want to work for, there are more than 20,000 such EUREXUS registered universities. And the last component is, of course, EUREXUS Worldwide, which is where we come into being. So that is more or less the crust of what EUREXUS does. I guess I've answered your question.
So if I'm a researcher and I come to you, how exactly does it work?
So, of course, we are not a funding agency. We are there to help researchers get access to some sort of funding that is already there, right? So, for example, if you look at the EU framework program, the Horizon Europe, which is the most current framework program, within Horizon Europe, there are several ways in which a researcher can get involved. But let's take into consideration the excellent science, which is the pillar one, which has approximately 23 billion euros allocated to it for the 7 years period. Within that, there is this ERC, Marie Curie, right? There are opportunities within ERC and Marie Curie that a researcher can avail. And there is something for researchers at every stage of their career, which is something that researchers need to be aware of. Of course, there is a lot of ambiguity in terms of what is available for Australians to receive as funding, right? Because Australia is still a third country and not an associate country. The interesting part about that is Pillar 1, which is excellent science, ERC, Marie Curie, is open for researchers of any nationality. So your nationality does not impede you from receiving funding, which is a very good part, and also some sort of an embracing part in terms of Europe to help researchers collaborate. The idea is it's not about brain drain, it's about brain circulation. And we are very keen on making sure that if a university in Australia wants to have Europeans come to their university, there is a mechanism within Marie Curie Global Fellowship. So there is this two-way channel that we want to push. So of course, as a researcher, we organize lots of these webinars, and they can get access through these webinars to experts, to evaluators at times. And that is where it all begins.
Not brain drain, but brain circulation. I like that description. What's a success story? What's a success story of UREXUS that comes to your mind?
To be honest, of course, we have had this pandemic when we started our operations, right? But at UREXUS, we always looked at it from a positive note, and looking at the silver lining, what this pandemic brought was we managed to organize lots and lots of virtual events. What that allowed is, imagine me going to every major city and or university and speaking about European funding, right? And here we are constrained by not being able to travel. So what we resorted to was to organize these webinars where a lot of researchers from different universities would come together, and we spread the word. We organized quite a large number of these events. If I'm trying to give you a number, there were almost 40 plus events that we organized last year. For these 2 years, we have had more than 5,500 members who have become part of UREXUS Australia and New Zealand, which if you would tell me at the beginning of January 2020, I would have taken it with both my hands, of course, right? So, and it's not just the number, it's actually the dynamic collaboration that we have with these researchers. We see a lot of success stories coming out. So if you just look back at January of this year, the ERC starting grants result were announced, and there were 3 Australians and 1 researcher from New Zealand who received this grant. Of course, success in terms of receiving a grant is entirely up to a researcher, how he writes the proposal, how he puts forward his idea or her idea, right? But to get this access or awareness about these possibilities that they can get involved is where things matter. And we are looking at almost 100 applications for Marie Curie postdoctoral fellowship from Australia, which is an amazing number just for us. I think we have been fortunate that the research community here has embraced UREXUS with open arms. And it's not just the researchers, but actually the multipliers, interlocutors, other agencies that want to work with us. So I think it has been a very fruitful 2 year for us, and hopefully it remains that way in the near future as well.
Well, that's how UREXUS has organized all of its activities and its public information sessions and its webinars. If we actually turn to the researchers, now, researcher mobility in a time of widespread immobility sounds like quite a contradiction. What's your view as to what's happened, both to researcher mobility and trying to promote researcher mobility against the backdrop of the global pandemic and COVID-19?
Of course. I mean, these are really challenging times, regardless of whether you are looking for mobility or not. These are challenging times, but the message that we want to spread is, if you are looking to apply for any sort of fellowship or grant, and if there are mobility component to it, by case basis, it has been allowed that your fellowship has started. You can still work from Australia. You can still work from your own home country. You do not need to travel. But of course, the intention is to help this mobility component. The intention is to allow researchers from abroad try to reach to Europe, try to understand also not just the funding component or not just the technical component, but also the cultural aspects, right? That is an integral part of how these mobility work. But I'm aware that Australian researchers have received this leeway from the Commission itself to start their work remotely and still get access to all these fellowships and grants. So of course, we are looking forward to things opening up, and we are looking forward to more widespread mobility. But indeed, this pandemic had brought quite some limitations in terms of actual movement. Yeah.
So that would be a switch back from virtual mobility to physical mobility. Given that some people argued that the pandemic has actually accelerated the whole process of digitalization. That, the digital revolution was already well underway. And what COVID-19 has done is that it's just really brought everything forward, as it were. Is it your view that, what is your view? What happens to researcher mobility then, do you think, in the coming period? Are we likely to see a mixed model where people are doing this? You win these fellowships, you win these awards, and increasingly you might stay where you are, but you do some of it virtually with perhaps the aim of having a trip to the location as well. How do you think it'll play out?
Yes, there seems to be a paradigm shift. It's not just in the research world, but everywhere. Also in the corporate world, if you are looking at it from that perspective, I think hybridization is the way forward. By hybridization, of course, a mixture of remote working as well as the actual movement. Having said that, of course, an integral part of what ERC grants or what Marie Curie grants are, of course, is to allow people from different parts of the world to reach Europe, to meet people in person. As good as it is to work from your own location, it's always an added benefit when you meet people. So we do not want to discount that perspective in terms of what face-to-face meetings can bring. But of course, we also need to understand that there are ways in which we can become more efficient by using digital methods. Of course, these 2 years has made us understand there are ways without which we can still not lose productivity and be efficient and output oriented and still stay in our own homes and produce the results, right? So of course, I think it's a mixture of both digital as well as physical mobility that we are looking at.
You mentioned 600 support centres, and I was thinking, wow, that's a lot of support centres. If one's turning to UREXUS, is it beneficial to perhaps avoid the usual candidates and start to look to travel and engage and develop international synergies and partnerships elsewhere? 600's a lot, so that's presumably, as it were, the world is your oyster as a researcher.
Yeah, the easiest way, if you are, for example, just to give you a very visual way, if you are, for example, going to France and if you are looking at the Paris region, you can actually filter down as to which service center you want to request for help, right? So if you are looking at a particular university in a section, you look which service center appeals there. And the idea is for researchers to be aware that the people who know that particular location, geography, their system are there to help them without charging them anything, right? It's an amazing resource. If you are telling me as if I was a researcher, if I knew this is something that is available, I would be very happy. And to be honest, I remember during the pandemic, there was a researcher from Australia who was finding it very hard to find an accommodation in Ireland. And she wrote to me saying that, look, my fellowship has begun. I have to find an accommodation there. And we were able to actually liaise her to our UREXUS support center in Ireland. And it worked out very well for her, right? So there are people who are there to help. And they're always happy to help because we are supposed to help researchers, right? So of course, it's an automatic choice. If you want to go to Germany, Italy, wherever, you just go to the website, find which city you want to go, choose your service center, and they will be more than happy to assist.
So what's a typical day in the life of Nishant Shandilya as head of UREXUS in Australia?
It's a very good question because no 2 days are same for me and for regional coordinators in different parts of the world for UREXUS worldwide. The reason I mention this is because, as you understand, we are working with Europe as well as with Australia and New Zealand, right? So our working hours do not necessarily be 9 to 6, right? It can sometimes be till midnight because we have frequent meetings with Brussels and also in different parts of the world. So my day would generally start with reading any sort of current news or relevant news that comes out from the European research landscape, and trying to understand and filter what should be passed on to researchers and research community in Australia and New Zealand. I mean, what we are aware is at this day and age, there is information overload. So we want to just release those information which makes sense, which are pertinent for our region, right? So generally what we do is we post one news article, and that could be event, that could be a funding opportunity, or that could be a news, right? So it's just one article that comes out on our website per weekday, right? One article per day, and that gets circulated from our own social media channel, whether it be Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. Of course, this reaches out. Then we are always at the lookout of organizing these webinars, events, co-organizing events, also quite a number of career development series, whether it be also on publishing with book publishers, on STEM or humanities and social sciences. So there is a lot of activity that goes in terms of background work as to organizing this event. If you're looking at 40 plus events, you can imagine a lot of work is the actual background work in establishing this connection, how to put forward on what dates does it make sense to organize these events. So there is a lot of meeting that happens in my day. Of course, we interact a lot with researchers and the universities itself. We receive quite a lot of queries in terms of different type of grants, fellowship, how researchers can get involved. My idea is I tend to respond within 48 hours to these emails. That's some sort of a informal deadline I set for myself. And then, of course, that is one integral part where I write back saying, okay, these are the ways you can get involved, or give them pointers as to how they can be involved, whether it's be with participation in a webinar, or if we can actually liaise them to any expert or any previous grantee. We try to see how we can help. So, I mean, it's a mix of a lot of things. And I wish we had more than 24 hours in a day, because we are at that stage. We are growing in terms of EURAXUS reach. So yeah, it's quite a dynamic day for me always.
In your time living and working in Sydney, traveling around Australia and meeting colleagues at universities and meeting with students, what's your view of how Australia might better develop and deepen international research synergies and partnerships with Europe?
Yeah, I mean, see, a lot of the things, for example, if you are looking at the European research area and the communication of era, a lot of the values, the fundamental values that are European are also Australian. So we are not really that far apart in terms of the essential fundamental values. So it's just a matter of how we can actually move forward in a way that helps these research and research institution universities to come together, synergize, and come forward with collaborative projects that eventually helps the humankind in some larger ways, right? Of course, if you have been following the news, there has been movement in terms of how New Zealand has expressed interest to become part of Horizon Europe. And we are very hopeful that the department and the Australian government is also looking at Horizon Europe with open arms. And of course, we understand that there have been negotiations that have been happening. Hopefully for us, and also for researchers and research-intensive universities like University of South Australia, the best way would be if there could be some ways in which Australia could become associated to Horizon Europe, because that would open lots of opportunities, not just Pillar 1, which is excellent science, but Pillar 2 and in some part Pillar 3 as well. And Pillar 2, I believe within the pillar, there are clusters in which I believe Australia is very well suited in terms of collaboration with Europe, be it in health or be it in astronomy or similar sectors, right? So, of course, we want to push this collaboration in a way that researchers can avail these opportunities more, and of course, always remain positive in terms of the outlook.
From where we stand at the moment, for both Australia and Europe, obviously, immense challenges, not only the challenge of global warming and climate change, but we've been dealing with a global pandemic. Obviously now there's a war happening in Europe. Some see this and talk about as possibly, spilling over into some broader worldwide calamity. Against all of these really huge challenges, if I ask you to just look through your crystal ball out for the next few decades, what would be your hope for the development and deepening of these research connections between Australia and Europe? And how can we change things for the better?
Yeah, I mean, as a layman, to be honest, and I think it was, I'm quoting something from 1983, a Nobel laureate actually mentioned in his address that science has no boundaries, right? So, it was said almost 30 years ago, but there are still these barriers that remain. My idea would be, if I'm looking at 10 years down the line, that science and research should not have any boundaries. So if there are scientists or researchers who want to pursue certain opportunities in different parts of the world, they should not be hold back because they come from a certain region or from a certain nationality. Of course, how we make that happen is up to us in terms of the bureaucrats or the politicians. Researchers and scientists should not be worrying about, as Australian, I am not able to avail Pillar 2 funding from Horizon Europe. That should not be a concern for them. For them, what should be their concern is, this is my idea, how best I can put it in a way that is beneficial to a large number of people. And that should be the ultimate goal. I mean, that's me thinking out as the best perspective. Of course, if you look at this pandemic and the current situation in terms of Russia and Ukraine, there are challenges that are more immediate at the moment. If you are looking at the pandemic itself, I think the Commission very early, I think it was in March, April of 2020, that they realized the need of channelizing research efforts and funding to the pandemic. So, of course, almost 4 billion has been used under FP7 and Horizon 2020 in terms of addressing pandemics. But there were even more funding that came into being for immediate action in terms of how to tackle with coronavirus per se. Of course, it included €1 billion of money that came out for the global pledge and everything. But yes, I don't know if I was able to answer the decade or 2 decade of outlook, but my intention is there should not actually be any barriers to research and researchers.
Nishant, Shandilya, we wish you all the best for the work you're doing with UREXUS, and thanks very much for joining us on Monnet Conversations.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I think it was an excellent conversation. I look forward to working more closely with University of South Australia in the immediate future and in the long run as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.